2 weeks ago, we saw a challenge has happened. Definitely Israel has sinned. These people are taken into captivity, and so they are in a foreign land. And while they are there, we see that Mordecai refuses to bow down to the second highest man in the kingdom. And when that happens, plots to kill the Jews or the Hebrews. And a decree is made. And when he does that, letters are sent out in the different provinces. And again, the decree is passed in chapter 3 that all the Jews are going to be killed. But not something. You were in a foreign land. And definitely money has been given out, a budget. And when you look at chapter 3, it says 10,000 talents of silver. Now, to us that might not make a lot of sense. But converting it to our current currency, it gives about $900 billion. Imagine if that money is poured into Uganda. And they say every Christian has to be killed. Why? They are not worshiping the gods of the land. Would you still be a Christian? Yes or yes? Yes or yes? Yes. And so that is the situation. There is tension because what we are going to look at, we are seeing a banquet coming into play. And so we don't want to lose focus where we are coming from. We want to understand why a banquet and what we are being called to think about. And shortly after that, still, in Esther chapter 3, we see that Mordecai responds. He refuses to bow down to a foreign man. So to speak, worship that is meant for God to be given to man. And as these people were in captivity, they knew that one of the things they had to do, they had to live distinctively. The same way you and I have to live because we are foreigners in this space. And as a matter of fact, even Esther herself, she knew. She had the name Esther, which was for the king, which was for the region of the Persians and the Median. But her other name was what? Hadassah. So she kept that identity. Mordecai kept his identity. But that's not for today. So Mordecai refuses to bow down. He doesn't change his position. He still stands and he doesn't bow down to Haman. And he puts on the sackcloth and ashes. And this is a symbol of weeping and mourning, which is used in the ancient times. And most importantly, when catastrophe befell people. So there is mourning, there is fasting, there is weeping, there is waiting. And Mordecai calls all the Jews and there was crying unto God. That's happening. And you may wonder, is all that necessary? Absolutely yes, because it is going to make sense for the one thing that I want to talk about this morning. And so even Esther in chapter 4, he's called upon. So we've seen Mordecai, he refuses to change his position. Other Jews also respond. Esther is called upon and she's told, use your position as a queen so that we can be able to be saved. Definitely we are going to see that she, is it called dilly-dallying? She takes time to respond. Fortunately, she's able finally to come on board. And Esther calls for a fast. And she's praying. And when you look at chapter 4, specifically verse 16, it is said, this is Esther speaking, go after all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. There is action taking place everywhere. Then I will go to the king. Though it is against the law, And if I perish, I perish. You could only go in the presence of the king when you are invited. And if you went there without his notes, it only meant you either want to take advantage of the king and kill him. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. And that's how we land into chapter 5, where we are. And to start, we see they have called on God, they have fasted, they have prayed. And the next part we are seeing, Esther is planning a banquet for the king. And by this time, the interesting thing, she's a queen. And when we look at verse 3, she says, after approaching the king, first of all, this is interesting, verse 2, to note. And when the king saw Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter. A scepter is a symbol of authority. Some of us, especially in Africa, we know traditional chiefs who have those sticks. I don't know. Where I come from, kings don't, my king is in heaven, but yeah. Culturally, that stick which is held. And so when the king extended that hand, that stick, it meant that you have been accepted. And so verse 3, and the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you even to the half of my kingdom. And this phrase is going to be repeated again. Definitely, I don't think that the king was meaning that I'm going to give you the wall of my kingdom, but that could be a way of telling us that the king was open for her. But downwards, we're expecting Esther has to say something to the king. Unfortunately, if you are waiting for the response, you are not getting it. So Esther says, I need Haman to come this evening. And soon after that, we think that actually Esther is going to speak her concern. So in verse 7 and verse 6, the king asks again and says, what can I do? Even if it means to give you half of my kingdom, I'll do it. Again, we are longing to hear what Esther has to say. Surprisingly, she's not going to mention this in chapter 5, not even in chapter 6. We are going to see the response later in chapter 7. But for the second time, Esther just says, you know what, if it pleases you again, I would love to have you to the second banquet which I'm going to prepare this evening. You alone and Haman. Now, we don't know why Esther thought it that way, but we can only speculate. And one of the reasons could be because he was a king. I don't know whether the pronunciation is harem, Harem, Hsibo. Like the king had many wives. And Esther was not just a queen, but she was also knowledgeable. She knows what to say when and how to play the cards. And the big question this morning, dear friends, is to ask, what is this story about? What does God want us to pick from this bit, especially in the context of the book of Esther? One of the things I would love to encourage us this morning is that at the end of the few minutes, maybe 10 or 15 from now, is you be encouraged to keep your head up amid these trying times. Maybe to some of us, our desire to see that you are going to take the initiative through faith and action for God's purpose. My other goal might be that you are going to think around the context around you. For Esther, she had to use her position as a queen, as we shall see later. For Mordecai, definitely he also was able to use his authority as an uncle, and he influenced many others. And so in your context, perhaps that should be the vessel to be used in your family, in your church, in your nation, and wherever God is calling you. And to others, maybe you'll be able to recognize the need around you. Rather than blaming the government that is not doing so much, or the people around us, that we are the people. And when I say we, I mean the church. Ephesians chapter 3. For God desires to reveal his manifest wisdom through the church. And the church is not this building, but us. We started by singing the song, I am the salt and the light of the world. That's what we see so much in the 8 verses. Actually, not even all of them, but just like 3 verses. And that's why I said, just one thing that I would love to encourage us with is that we shall think about our responsibility alongside God's sovereignty. One of the things that we've seen in the past 2 weeks is how God's hand is able to work out and knit the story of men. God being sovereign over nations. God being sovereign over the weather, maybe not here directly. God being sovereign over men. And we are going to see that continue in the other chapters. But in between here is like a sandwich which is given to us. So the government doesn't have the answers, dear friends. The other day I was coming from Gulu and passing through Ruwero. I saw many are they industries or companies that have been set? They produce lots of Kavera Waraj, lots of them. And so when we think about what can we do, we cannot call the government. No. As a fact, it's government which gives them the what? The license. But it's the church which must shine light and take the gospel. We use what God has given us, the position in him, to see transformation out there. And that's what I would love to encourage you with this morning. Picking from the life of Esther and the life of Mordecai and these Jews who were desperate. And I'm hoping you'll be able to take the necessary steps. Part of it might be just for you to take a step and pray as Mordecai did. The book of Esther is in a context when, like I've said again, and this is important, when these people are in exile. They're in a foreign land. The same way Daniel was there. The same way the 3 Hebrew boys, when we were praying for the church, we prayed that the church will not compromise. The 3 Hebrew boys stood and said, our king, even if our Lord does not save us, yet we shall not bow down. Daniel stopped from praying. The following day, he even opened the window. And he did what? He prayed. Just calling you to a place of conversation. The place of taking action. The place of looking at your context. The place of looking at the need around us. And some of these things, we might think that we are not the one to do it, or maybe some people, like my brother was calling us to a place of mission, but we are all supposed to do that. So one of the things that we saw the last 2 weeks has been the sovereignty of God. But then there is a danger, dear brothers and sisters, and this is the danger where some people have been misused and have misunderstood when we say that God is able and is concerned about every detail in my life. And so what does that mean? I sit back and I lay at the side. And there are such kind of people. Some think they have waited for God for so long. Assuming for God that maybe God has given up on them. But you see, when we think about sovereignty, we also believe that we have to do our role as believers and as Christians. We don't want to be like a child who goes to school and he fails to revise. And when he fails, he says, but you know what? This is God's will. That's not what we are talking about. And so, for today, it's kind of changing the coin, the side of the coin, and we say, God is able. But at the same time, It's a parallel truth. He is also inviting us to a place where we have to respond and use prudence, wisdom to respond and act in faith and take action. And so when I'm a careless driver, I cannot say, oh, Alhamdulillah, like the Muslims would say. That's what God has wished. I have to take my responsibility. And so to a great detail, God's sovereignty does not equal neglecting our responsibility. On the contrary, we see Esther and Mordecai. They show a great initiative. They take courage. And their actions are significant to change the story in this book. And when we read these narratives, dear brothers and sisters, they are not just stories like Wakaima and It's Wakaima and who? And Wango. These are actual events that happened. When we read that the river parted, it was an actual event that the sea parted. And so we are walking with these giants to pick encouragement. Look at the journey. In chapter 4, for instance, a decree is sent. And I'm inviting you and I'm affirming the issue of you taking responsibility and commitment in the context where God has called you. A decree is set that these people are going to be killed in January. It is declared. Letters are taken. But then they cast lots and they say, in December. So in between, we are seeing tension, anxiety. Definitely fear will come into play. But rather than despairing and rather than giving up, we see these men taking action. Mordecai wept. Mordecai put on the sackcloth. It's an action. Esther was not so sure. But at the same time, we see that she responds and she seeks God, even as a queen, together with the people that she had. And one of the things that she does is to prepare a banquet. Every time Mordecai and Esther had the opportunity to be promoted or to do the next right thing, they stepped forward in faith with regard to their own safety and reputation. And this is what this book of Esther brings into picture, specifically verse 5, is that there is a balance between what God does and definitely where he's inviting us also to respond. Three things were likely to happen if Esther did not really take action. One of the things, she might have been killed. You remember what we've said when the king saw her? He extended the scepter, which was a sign that she had been accepted. That's one of the things that actually happened. She was received. The other option was for her to lay back. But if you remember the words of Mordecai, do not think yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all other Jews. For if you keep silent at the time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. In other words, despite being a king, the decree was against all the Jews. She couldn't survive either. At least that indicates that. So, three things. She could be received, she could lay back and let her be killed, and definitely going into the king's presence, and she gets to be killed. This is not the only place where we see the Bible calling us to the action. One of the other areas we see Peter and John, maybe a little bit from Acts chapter 4. From Esther chapter 5, and we look at Acts chapter 4. We are seeing two men, Peter and John. And these are disciples that really believed in God's sovereignty. At some point, they were stopped to preach the gospel. And they said, we cannot do that for anything. And specifically, verse 24, Peter and John had been charged not to speak or to teach at all in the name of Jesus. But verse 24, and when they heard it, they lifted their voices together to God and said, Sovereign Lord, you hear them? Who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything in them? Who through mouth of our father David, your servant, said by the Holy Spirit. Maybe you can run to verse 28 and they continue. To do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. And now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness. I love you to hear the two truth happening. They even pray in the name of the sovereign Lord. But at the same time, they don't want to presume that that was the will of God. For them to do what? To be stopped. And at the same time, friends, as I'm going to qualify what I'm saying, I am not calling for anarchy, that we move in rebellion and force faith. But I'm calling us to a place of recognizing and realizing where the hand of God is, and sometimes where, I would say, the hand of Satan is oppressing and standing in the way. So Peter and John, and other disciples, acknowledge God's sovereign purposes in events like the crucifixion, but they did not want to presume. They knew Christ had commanded them to be his witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But they took action and they prayed, confident that sovereign God, who had commanded them to be their witness, was able to clear the way and obstacles in obedience. So one of the reasons we approach God in prayer is because we know God is sovereign to answer the prayer. And one of the reasons why we continuously go before God is knowing that we don't know so much about his secret will. And so, amid this tension, like these people, we are called to take action. The other good example which we can see is that in Nehemiah chapter 4. Still, when he was rebuilding the wall, there were threats, Sanballat and Tobiah, enemies of the Jews. Nehemiah's response was to pray and post guards. And this is where we exercise prudence and wisdom. Prayer has to happen as well. In addition, the text says, specifically verse 16 and 18, from that day on, half of my men did not work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. Not that those who carried materials did their work in one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his armor on the sides as he was doing. Nehemiah was a believer in God, and he knew God was sovereign, and he knew these men were the enemies of the work of God, rebuilding the wall of God. The wall of Jerusalem. But he still took action. Half of the men were guarding. But even those who were building, they had a weapon in the arm and a weapon and a omwiko in their hands. Finally, when Apostle Paul is in prison in Rome, he wrote to his friend Philemon, and this is what he tells him. You are in prison, you are incarcerated, you don't know whether you are going to come out. And these are stories, some of them to call us from wherever we have been. Possibly, we are actually believing in God, but we had given up in some areas, even our lives. And possibly, there are situations that come our way and they derail us and weaken us. But listen to Paul while he was in prison. He says, he wrote to his friend and he says, and that's Philemon 1 verse 22. Prepare a guest room for me. This is because Paul hoped that at some point maybe he would be restored. He hoped that someday, maybe he would come out of that prison. He did not say, I will be restored. But he knew that God in his sovereignty was well able to effect his release. So he asked Philemon to pray. Prayer was an expression of his confidence in the sovereign God. And again, friends, we are called not to fall in that place of fatalism, believing that God is able, let him do everything. The Bible calls us to both ways. That's what these 8 verses are pointing us to. And later on, we are going to see God's hand twisting and changing the story. That even Mordecai's action that had been, quote unquote, forgotten in chapter 3, the books of remembrance are going to be opened. So in between those two, we see men, flesh and blood, in action. So my encouragement, dear brother and sister, is do not disqualify yourself. Trust in God's promises. One of the things about these Hebrew guys, they knew that prophets like Jeremiah, who prophesied before going to exile, they told them words like Jeremiah 29, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And I want to believe most of us have used it, especially at the beginning of the year. New Year resolution, isn't it so? Yeah. But you know, these are people, God is saying, go to captivity. I have a good plan for you. And there are false prophets who are saying, no, you cannot go. And Jeremiah has told them, God has a good plan for you. Go, plan to buy fields, plan to marry, have children. And even later on, he adds and says, pray for the peace of the city where you are going. You are going in captivity. So you have to be careful as you quote Jeremiah 29. You might be saying, God, keep me in my captivity. Context. But you see, they believed in the hope that God had given them. And another hope was in Isaiah 40 to 55, which contains a message of comfort. Comfort, 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 all my people. When you get a chance to read Isaiah. Promising a return to the land and a new covenant. There was hope that they would return. Ezekiel spoke about the new temple and the restoration of the people. And you remember when, Haggai, there was a rebuilding of the temple. And I'm saying that, dear friends, to say that just like we see Mordecai, this young woman, Hadassah, Esther, and the Jews were in tension and so much, we are in the world which is not immune. Anything can happen. But we still keep on and take action and trust God. And trust God. And despite all that, not just to act in foolishness, but in actual sense, to take, act in wisdom. The same way David, he knew David was in the will of God to be king. He had been anointed, but he tried to avoid the traps of Saul. So when we say act, we are not saying take foolish decisions. No, we are saying with wisdom, act and respond. Do not lay back into fatalism of saying, God, you know it all. For me, I'm staying this side until when you are going to come back. And so, be encouraged, dear friends, as the Bible would put it, to approach God boldly in prayer, not because of your own worthiness, but because Jesus, our high priest, sympathizes with our weaknesses. And so even during the time of trial and testing, like Hebrews 4:16 has said, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We are not called to being anxious about anything, but in everything as well. In Philippians 4:6, to give our prayers, through prayer, in everything and supplication, and with thanksgiving, to make our request known. And again, friends, like I said in the beginning, my goal was to encourage you that you do something in your situation around you, perhaps your life. It could even be your own sin, captive to the world, but you're in the church. So what are some of the needs around you? We've heard we need to reach out to the community. Are we mindful to think about that? Are we able to raise the cry before God? Mordecai did that. Maybe you've heard about Mother Teresa. She found her purpose in dealing with poverty. So my question again, what are the needs around you? What are your passions? What is driving your life? What do you want to see happen badly that you'd be ready to take a bullet for it? Is it preaching the gospel? Martin Luther King Jr. was born in the context of racial segregation. And he wanted to see many black Americans not segregated. And he stood for that. Again, not just an invitation to activism. Ours is rooted into the gospel as we reach out. But we also know that William Wilberforce, he fought against slave trade and used his position in parliament. And he was able to advocate for that evil. What is that we can be able to do? In the context of our lives, in the context of our church. Esther prepared a banquet. Later on, I didn't want to mention that. We shall see what the results were. The tables flipped. I just love to say that our small actions can be able to do something great for the kingdom. What we call small, God is able to use it for the greater purposes. And here's the encouragement from the gospel. We see the courage not just of Mordecai and the Jews, but also Esther with her famous words, "If I perish, I perish." But then, even as we think about doing this, let's think about Jesus, the true Esther, who didn't just risk losing his palace, but he lost his heavenly one. Philippians tells us that he left it and he came. And he did it at the cost of his life. And he saved us. So he's inviting us to work alongside him to see change around us. Take action, trust God, think about your life, think about the needs around you and the context around you.